and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham-Pars incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer, really, standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes, and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And first of all, I would like to thank Connie Willis for filling in for me last week. Nope, she's not a relative. But, I fell off a ladder, and I did this kind of funky roll back and smacked my head right on my walkway. And it was a concussion. I had a concussion, and it made things very murky, and that was just 2 days before the show last week. And for the most part, I was kind of like spaced out in a dreamlike state, and I didn't even have to pay for it. It was free. However, I do not recommend you try this at home. I know I have a bad sense of humor. I get told that all the time. We're doing things differently this evening, as I only have our very sensible guest, Greg Bishop, on for the first hour. Then in hour two, I hope to hear from you, the live listener. You can call and say hello. You can discuss what our guests talked about on the topics. You can tell us about a personal UFO sighting you had, or whatever you would like, as long as it more or less pertains to the UFO topic. And that number to call is 603-967-4030. You can also Skype me at Marty Willis. That's MartyWillis. That's my Skype username. All you have to do is search that under add contacts and just dial away. So I'm going to be closing the show about 40 minutes after the second hour with the pre-recorded news I did with Alejandro Rojas, UFO updates. And it's pre-recorded, but it is unedited. I like to do the news unedited because, first of all, I'm lazy, and secondly, it keeps the live show feel, so to speak. So I want to thank all of you that support the show, and if you can't support the show, we still appreciate you, and you can listen to the show free live every Wednesday evening at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that's right here on podcastufo.com. There's a chat room there as well, and you can also listen to PSN Radio. That's live. We're streaming through that. And we run every Thursday on the Dark Matter Digital Network, and that's at 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Standard Time as well. So, Greg Bishop, a little bit about him. In 1991, he co-founded a magazine called The Excluded Middle, which was a journal of UFOs, the paranormal conspiracy, psychedelia, and new science. His first book, Wake Up Down There, anthologized the articles and features. Greg's second book was Project Beta. He has a new book, and it's called It Defies Language, and it's kind of an essay of a whole bunch of UFO and government, there's kind of fringe issues and personalities and all that. He also has a radio show called Radio Misterioso, and that's radiomisterioso.com, just how it sounds. And it's in its 17th year, and this guy was doing podcasts before podcasts were even invented somehow. Anyway, he's ahead of his time and a sensible guy, like I said. Greg Bishop, welcome to the show.
Hey, Martin. Yeah, well, it wasn't a podcast then. It was on a FM pirate radio station. That's when I started.
Oh, okay. But you were in the online really early, though, weren't you?
I moved when the FCC busted the pirate radio station about a year later in 2000. September of 2000 was my first live internet broadcast, and then the podcast started in about 2006, 7, something like that. At least live internet, and also posted on my site. Now that's all it is. It's I do the live shows from my house, and then the shows are posted within a few weeks anyway at RadioMysterioso.com.
Oh, I see. So you do a live radio show from your house and record it as a podcast.
Yeah, so if people want to listen live, because I like doing a live show. I don't know why I still like doing that, but, most people listen to it later. I get, 20, 30, 40 people listening live, and then, a few thousand people listen on, for upload. Yeah,
I think it's similar here, but I love doing, I don't know why, and I have an odd name for a live show. It's Podcast UFO, of course. But it is live. I tried it live once, and I just can't go back. And it saves a lot of editing, too,
Oh, I still do the editing. I occasionally say things, or I say or whatever. Or we get into something that I don't think is very important. Or I say something I really didn't want to say, and I don't want to broadcast again. So, it happens. And people can say whatever they want on my show. I mean, they can swear or whatever. I don't care. Yeah. It's just freewheeling.
Well, it's. I have heard someone that does a podcast say that once you have a podcast, it's out there. Once you publish it, it's out there. So if you don't like it, edit it. And but I don't. And so hopefully we won't feel as though we would have to edit anything out of this one.
No, well, you probably do a smooth show. I think I do, but then I listen back to it and go, I don't like. And plus, I was a sound engineer, and I still am, but I was paid as a sound engineer for 15 years. So I have an audio, I have an audio bug where I need things to sound a certain way and be a certain way just because that's my thing. So I just happen to be an audio person, so that's probably another reason. If I wasn't, I probably would just post it, without really worrying about it.
Yeah. Now I see on your icon on Skype the Pascagoula alien.
Yes, you're one of the few people that actually notice what it is.
Yeah, and I had Calvin Parker on a number of years ago. What a nice gentleman he is. I don't know. Have you ever spoken with him?
No, never. I mean, I was intrigued that he was speaking about the sighting against what it wasn't really a sighting; it was a close encounter. Many years later, because Hickson did. He wrote a book about it, which is a fascinating book if you can find it. What did Calvin Parker say?
Oh, it was very interesting. That whole case is really fascinating to me. How he kind of faked the fact that he said that he passed out when he hadn't. That type of thing, just so they'd leave him alone.
Yeah.
But what a nice gentleman he is, and kind of a unique story is he got connected to an estranged daughter through my show after she found it on the internet. So I was really happy about that. Yeah. So for the person that does not know Greg Bishop, can you just give a little background and how you got fascinated by the subjects in the beginning?
I don't know. I started reading UFO and anomalies books, Bigfoot, ghosts, cryptozoology, even though it wasn't called that then. I started reading those when I was a kid, and I went through all the books in one library, and then I went to another library and read all the books there that I hadn't read in the first one.
Wow.
So that took me a few years, and, that was from age, 8 or, 6 or 8 till about maybe 13.
Wow.
And then I stopped reading about it and stopped caring. And, I got older and, partying and girls and all that were interesting. And then after I got out of college, I had this horrible week where, my girlfriend left me and I got canned from my job. And one of my friends, who I thought was a really good friend, basically stiffed me for a lot of money. And anyway, all this stuff happened in 1 week.
Oh,
so
God.
I was very depressed. And at that point, I read a book. I read an article that was an excerpt of a book by Robert Anton Wilson. I think it was from what's the book? The New Inquisition, the one about how science is sometimes scientists act like priests in a religion and protect their information rather than expanding it. Anyway, I was, at that point, I was in such a low period in my life, and I think I read that at just the right time, and it got me right back into it. I don't know why it did it, but it did. I guess I just needed something to cling to, and that was what interested me. And then, in a different way of thinking about it than I had, previously read. So,
wow.
Since then, I've been all into it. Then about a year after that, I met Bill Moore and a few other UFO researchers, and I was kind of back into it again, and I haven't stopped since then.
Well, while you just mentioned Bill Moore's name, now I understand you're still friends with Bill?
Yeah.
And are you must be one of the very few UFO-related people that remain friends with him. Is that fair to say that? Yeah.
I mean, I don't think he's interested in talking to anybody because he doesn't want to talk. He just doesn't want to deal with it anymore. It's just nothing he's interested in. Yeah.
Now, I know someone that was seated in the MUFON meeting. It's actually someone I'm sure you know as well, Chris Lambright. He was telling me about that whole situation when Bill just came out with the disinformation thing. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. You were there too. Wow. Yeah. So what was that like?
It was the best speech I've ever seen given anywhere, mainly because of the reaction. I've never seen so many people upset in such a dramatic way so quickly.
How long did he go on about it?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess an hour and a half, 2 hours. I have since I don't know if it's online, but I've since located a recording of it. Actually, somebody gave it to me, and you can see them stop every once in a while, and you can barely hear people yelling because the microphone was very bad. It was real good for a foot or so in front of the microphone, but you could, the state section director got up and said, please let him finish. He's a guest, and he told me beforehand, he said, I'm going to say something that's really going to blow everybody's socks off. And I said, what? And he said, well, I can't tell you. Because he lived in L.A. at the time, and I was in communication with him. I saw him every probably 2 or 3 weeks anyway, because he lived about probably 3 or 4 miles from me. But when we got there, I said, I guess, and he wouldn't tell me what hotel he was in or anything. He just stayed at a hotel separately from everybody else. He didn't submit his paper to the symposium proceedings that they printed up. And then he came up on stage and said, the government messes with some of you people, and you have to know that they're doing it. And I know that because they did it to me, and they had me basically watch while it happened to other people. And I couldn't really do anything about it. He said, because he had an agreement where he wouldn't. Anyway, so everybody saw it as a huge betrayal, and most people got very upset with him. And later, there are people that have said, well, we caught him red-handed, so he had to admit what he was talking about, what he was doing. And his side of the story was, I was so sick of people accusing me of things that I wanted to get up and tell them exactly what I'd done. Really? As much as I could, so that people would stop spreading rumors and saying what wasn't true. So I told him exactly as the truth as he saw it, and after that, nobody wanted to talk to him anymore. And about 5 years after that, he just said, "Well, forget it." Also, his deal with the government was that he would get UFO information in exchange for his cooperation, and he did, but none of it was really very useful.
Wow.
Ultimately, it didn't prove anything, except that the government was interested in the subject, which we already know.
Isn't that something? So I was just going to ask you, what baited him into doing that. So very interesting. Now, I know that there's a lot of controversy about different subjects. MJ-12 is another one. And your book, Project Beta, I'm sure touches on all this stuff. And the Paul Benowitz case, which is tragic and fascinating both at the same time.
Yeah.
And had you ever met Paul?
No, I never met him. When I went out to work on the book, I found out from his son when I was asking him to cooperate with the book that he had died the week before I got there.
Wow.
And he was kind of upset with me and told me to leave his office, which was very disheartening and upsetting to me. But I told him, look, I've been contracted to write the book. I'm trying to be fair about it. And he said, I don't care. I don't want to be involved in it. And his father had just died, so I'm sure it was a very bad time to ask him. I didn't know this.
Yeah. I'm wondering if he or any other family member has read the book or would even want to.
I don't know if they have. I mean, if I was them, I don't know. He had, I think, 2 sons and a wife. I'm not sure if the wife's still alive. She was, as of a couple of years ago. I don't know if the sons have read it because nobody has heard any reaction from them whatsoever, and they just don't want to get involved. I mean, it's something that messed up their family, probably shortened their father's life, and they just don't want to talk to a bunch of UFO wackos about it.
Yeah, I'm sure it probably did shorten his life. I do want to say an update to the listening audience. Back several months ago, I was working at an auction house. A friend of mine owns it. And in a trunk that belonged to an ex-CIA agent that was stationed in China and Japan and places like that, the owner of the auction gallery found copies of the MJ-12 documents. Now, so the follow-up, there is no follow-up. I have not had a return call from the son. I just wanted to find out why he would have those documents. But I have not heard, this is a follow-up for the listeners, I have not heard back from the son on that, which I think, Greg, don't you think that's kind of interesting that a CIA would have copies of those documents?
Yeah, but I think he probably got it from open sources and just had them, or it was something that, they had in the office. Just because a CIA person has it doesn't mean that they're official, real documents. It just means it's something that person was interested in, real or not. And I think some people, including, I think, Kevin Randall, as far as I know, have decided that MJ-12, Stanton Friedman has not. He still maintains that it was a real group. But some people, including Bill Moore, have come to the conclusion that it was a real group, but it had nothing to do with UFOs or anything. It was just so obscure that it was really, and so secretive that it was really easy to hang the whole UFO thing on it.
Wow.
Because there was no real record of it except that, Cutler Twining memo where it said, the MJ-12 meeting has been postponed or whatever. So, yeah, a few researchers are kind of convinced that it had something to do with continuation of power in the event of a nuclear war or something like that, and nothing to do with UFOs, but it was really easy to hide the UFO thing on it, and that most of the documents that have UFO and MJ-12 in them were forged by somebody in the government who knew what they were doing. A lot of people think Bill Moore did it. I don't think that he had the wherewithal or the know-how to do those things.
Yeah, I've heard that rumor.
I've heard it multiple times. I don't think he did it. A lot of things in ufology, I think, are very mixed up with people's emotions. And a lot of people think of Bill Moore as the villain. He's a friend of mine. I know his motivations. He's told me the truth as far as he can tell me. And if he can't, he just says, well, I can't tell you about that. He's never lied to me. I've never caught him lying to me at all. He's told me things that he doesn't want me to discuss publicly, and I never have. But to me, he's been very, honest and forthcoming as much as he can be. So I tend to agree with him on most things. He didn't like everything in Project Beta. He said some of it upset him, but he didn't disagree. He didn't say that they were false, which was very interesting.
Ah, okay. And in that book, did you actually talk about what? I have not read that book, by the way. And did you talk about his involvement in the whole situation along with Richard Doty?
Have I talked to him about it?
No. I'm sorry. In that book, does it discuss Bill Moore's involvement?
Sorry, that's my phone.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, it does discuss Moore's involvement, Doty's involvement. I wrote this book over 10 years ago, so it's kind of hard for me to remember everything.
Sure. Uh-huh.
I mean, I'm sure people come up to you in your podcast and say, remember when this was on? You're like, I don't even remember saying that. So when you ask me these questions, I answer to the best of my ability. But, Moore's involvement was you do things for us, meaning this group within the government, and we will give you UFO information. So he did things for them like tell them what certain UFO researchers were into, what they were looking at, and what they were interested in. Not because they cared about what they did with UFOs. What they cared about was if they knew anything about national security stuff. Like, if they said, I saw this thing in the sky and it was, near a Air Force base or something like that, and it had something to do with a secret program. They wanted to know what people were looking at and thinking about because they didn't want that stuff getting out. Even hints of it. And if it was getting out, they wanted to know who knew it and who knew it, in their networks of intelligence people in other countries so they could kind of trace who knew what. That's what it was for. It had nothing whatsoever to do with trying to make UFO researchers look bad or give them false leads or anything like that. I don't think, at least the thing that Moore was involved with was just an intelligence operation. That was it. Let's find out what people know and who know, what they know and who they know. That's really all they cared about. And Moore said that he would cooperate with that. He even did things like he would get they had spies in Russia, because this was in the 80s, that were working for the government or working in defense factories, and they would, or in some part of the defense industry, and they would send them reports. But the reports would be on these little cards that were from UFO researchers in Russia. And they'd send them to Bill Moore. They'd say, Dear Mr. Moore, I'm a researcher in this country or this part of the Soviet Union. I'm really interested in this case, or this case happened here, and I'd like to, tell you about that, start a dialogue, whatever the hell it was. But the thing was, it had nothing to do with that. There were coded messages in these cards, these postcards. So he would call a phone number, he said, and we would read the postcard exactly as it was, punctuation and everything, because the code was embedded in it by telephone, because there was no internet yet.
Yeah.
So and then when he was done, he sent it to a specific address, and it was a different address. He would put it in an envelope and send it on to another address.
Wow.
And it was a different address every time. So there was weird spy stuff going on in addition to all this UFO stuff that people know about. And as far as I know, he was asked to pass one piece of disinfo to Paul Benowitz, and he told him to take it with a grain of salt. And Bill said he locked it in a safe and never talked about it. I'm sure it affected his thinking, though. How could it not? A weird thing is that everything that he said that had to do with Greg Valdez noticed this. Gabe Valdez's son, he has a book called Dulce Base, which is amazing. It's a really good book. If you want to read Project Beta, read that one after it, because he doesn't agree with me on some stuff, but it's a really good companion piece. What he said was when Benowitz was talking about UFOs and aliens and all that, it made no sense whatsoever, had nothing to do with reality, and there was no way to check it out, and nobody's ever been able to prove any of it. However, when he was talking about defense projects, he generally was kind of right on, because they would tell him what was going on so that intelligence people from other countries that knew that he knew some of this stuff would ask him. So they would give him, bits and pieces of information about secret projects, often misleading ones. And then they'd see in all their communications that they were monitoring and people they were monitoring who talked about the same stuff, so they knew who was listening to Benowitz and what they were talking about. So it was a very complicated thing, having mostly to do with all to do with national security. The only UFO part of it was that Moore was supposedly getting information, classified documents occasionally, which he did. And at this point, he tends to think most of them are probably partly or mostly fake.
Wow. Yeah, disinformation. I was listening to a political show recently, and the Dan Carlin, and he was talking about disinformation that the government does, and by mixing in truths with false information, which is exactly the same. It's their bailiwick, what they can what they do to cover secrets, which I think is really interesting because it kind of ties into the UFO field. Now, Dulce, I would like to talk about that because that's just one of those places that's really mysterious. Whether there's an underground base in fact there, or was it all to steer, Paul Benowitz away from watching what was going on across the street? So what's your ideas on Dulce? I mean, I think I've heard you say before that some people have claimed that they're certain that there was some type of underground base there of some kind, military.
Yeah. What's interesting is what Greg Valdez found out from Gabe's his father's files after he passed on. I was very good friends with Gabe. His family was incredibly nice to me. They're great people, and I was very sorry when he passed away. His son, though, and he told me some of this stuff before he died, but of course I didn't look at his files or anything. He showed me some of them that were relevant to Project Beta, and to Benowitz, but not all of his stuff, because he was heavily involved in the cattle mutilation mystery too, very, very early on. What he told me, and I trusted him because he's a level-headed guy, law enforcement, was that he thought there was some sort of base there. He did not, at some underground facility. He didn't know if it was a base or what was going on there. I think he tended to think it had something to do with biological warfare. The funny thing is that when his son's book came out, Dulce Base, he said that, and this is in line with Benowitz saying if it was a secret project, he was generally kind of pretty near the mark. What he seems to think it was, and what was indicated to him in the notes, was that there was some kind of base that had the capability to have aircraft land in it underground. It sounds like James Bond or something. Wow. The funny thing is, it fits. I don't know. I've never been there. I don't know if this is totally true, but it's coming from somebody whose judgment I trust. Namely Greg and especially his father. And it fits in with the stuff Benowitz said he was seeing and what people up there were seeing. They said they saw things, a lot of strange things flying through the air. In addition to the cattle mutilations, there were a lot of UFO sightings. I think there kind of still are, not nearly as much.
Yeah, but I understand that it is a real strange place. That's what a lot of people do say that.
Yeah, and it's out in the middle of nowhere, really. It's on an Indian reservation, sovereign Indian land, which is a whole nother piece of the puzzle, too, because if you have agreements with the tribe, you can kind of do what you want, almost, because the laws don't apply there. The laws that apply on federal lands or private lands do not apply in tribal land. So anyway, and that includes maybe some companies or parts of the military that want to do something there. Anyway, people saw things flying around there quite a lot. Benowitz and other people said they saw things flying in and out of the mountains there, like into a mountain. They couldn't tell where it went. It just disappeared, like went to a mountain, then disappeared and looked like it went in. Benowitz said he could see entrances. I don't know how many other people have said that. Gabe actually told me that there was an I said, have you ever seen an entrance to an underground anything in the backcountry there? And he said, yes.
Really?
I said, well, what was it like? And he said, what it looked like is there used to be one, and somebody had just covered it over or dynamited it or whatever. But you could see that there used to be something there, and it was bigger than a mine. It was just some big entrance, possibly. So he said he tended to believe Benowitz on that account. So who knows? They might have been testing some very strange, exotic flying technology out of a base inside the mountain there. I think that's more likely than aliens invading and having a base there and flying UFOs in and out of it. Yeah. So that's as far as my thinking and research has gotten on that. So I entertain the possibility that there could have been some underground facility of some sort in the mountains north of Dulce on the Jicarilla Apache tribal land. Also, strangely enough, there's been Bigfoot sightings there too, which is great.
Wow. How about that? One of the things I thought of is why wouldn't the locals know? But you kind of address that if it's on a reservation, then everything kind of changes a bit. Like I wondered how people could come in through the road, the transport in supplies, stuff like that. But of course, they could fly in things if that's what they were doing. But it's always been kind of a mystery, like if there really was something like a military underground base, so to speak. I'm not saying aliens either, but some type of military secret base there. It just seems like the locals would seem to know about it.
Well, they know at the time they knew there was something going on there, definitely. If there was an agreement, the tribal elders or whoever has, whoever runs the government there or the tribal government may not necessarily tell everybody what they're doing.
Right.
It's, I don't think it's as open as we might think it is. And different tribes do things differently. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to speak for the Hickory Apache tribe there. I don't know. But it's happened before where some people in the tribe made, there's factions and schisms, and some people make an agreement with some outside agency so they can do something. And it's not, it's not agreed upon by everybody or even told to everybody. It's happened before, so this could have happened in Dulce as well.
Now, you mentioned earlier, going back to the Paul Benowitz case, that basically it was more or less to find out what people could find out. So he said he saw a craft flying out of there. Are you thinking that it's some type of experimental military craft that he was seeing?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. If he did see something flying out of it, and other people saw things too, that perhaps it was some type of experimental military stealth craft that had radar and, or more importantly, optical stealth, because he said he could see things flying and then they would disappear in midair, as if somebody had turned on some cloaking thing or whatever. I don't even know if I put that in the book, but that's something he had reported. And I think, as far as I can remember, other people had too. So it wasn't just Benowitz being some crazy person. I mean, he was seeing things. The funny thing was that people in the government were telling him to go there and look for it.
Yeah.
And I think they were doing that because they wanted to know who, because the only people that pay attention to him were, one, UFO people, researchers, and two, intelligence agents from other countries.
Wow. So
sometimes the same, wrapped up in the same person.
Mm-hmm. Now, this thing about when he was given a computer, do you think that I can't remember exactly the details of that, but he was given a computer and then he started seeing images and things on it.
Yeah,
this is going back to early computers.
Yeah, this was 1980 or something. So you can. He knew how to build computers. He was really smart electrical engineer. He built his own computers and wrote his own software. So, at one point he had built computers and had written software or encoded software in the hardware or something it isn't software at that point. It's just he built computers that were designed to decode things he was hearing coming from the base. And he thought it was aliens talking to, talking to their base or people in the government or something. And he said that, he was hearing things, about some sort of invasion, and it was freaking him out. The government did not like that he was actually decoding some of the stuff they had spent a whole bunch of money to encode. I think it was microbursts, and where it is a burst of radio signal that just sounds like static. But if you have the right decoding equipment, it can be decoded into a lot of information that has been compressed into a tiny little bit of a radio burst. And this was 1978, 79, 80, when nobody even knew anything about this. Wow. So Benowitz was figuring this out, freaking them out, and they said, well, okay, you know what? We're tired of having him, he's getting closer, I guess, to what we're doing here, and we don't want him to do that. So let's get a trusted person to bring him a ready-made computer with all this stuff on it. Because he trusted the government. He thought he was working with people in the Air Force. So, and Bill told me this, and I put this in the book, and I specifically mentioned in the book that he was the only one that told me this, because, of course, people have trust issues with Moore. The reason I put it in the book is because I wanted to find out if anybody could verify it. What he told me is that J. Allen Hynek, the famous UFO researcher that everybody knows, was the one that had given the computer to Benowitz, had shown up at his door with the computer and said, here, this might help you. This is from the Air Force. Because he was still on the Air Force payroll. He didn't really do very much, but I think he got a stipend from them, and every once in a while he was asked to do something, and this was one of the things. Now, that's a very explosive and kind of frightening thing to say. So, I got in touch with the Center for UFO Studies, and multiple times, at least twice, and I said, look, I'm trying to find out if something that happened with Paul Benowitz in 1980 or whatever it was is true. Do you have any of Hynek's files from that time that I could look at? And they never got back to me. I think I bothered them maybe 3 times. Yeah, well, they got back to me saying, yeah, we'll look, but then they never got back to me after that. So there's no way I had of confirming this. I didn't have the time to, and at this point, I don't really care if I do or not. But like I said, it's a very important part of the story, and if true, is an interesting look into, what Hynek was still doing. He probably had no idea what he was doing, delivering this computer. They probably just said, give this to this guy and tell him that it'll decode messages or something. Oh. And of course, Benowitz would know who Hynek was. He probably freaked out when he showed up at his door and gave him this computer. I don't know past that what the story was. And it could be totally false, but Moore said that Hynek told him this at some point in the 80s, in the late 80s, I believe. So I don't know if it's true or not. I would love to find out. I would love to find somebody else or some other way of confirming that story was true. That's the main reason why I put it in the book. I didn't put it in there to spread a lie or start a rumor or anything. I want confirmation of it.
Would you say that the just kind of like a blatant term that the Air Force actually drove him crazy?
No.
Okay.
I think they helped quite a bit.
Yeah.
Because he was very unhinged before he even talked to the Air Force. And people, it's like, well, how do you know that? It's like, because I can't remember his name. The UFO researcher in I can't think of names anymore. Early abduction researcher.
Sprinkle? No.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Leo Sprinkle was sent to Benowitz's house by APRO to find out about this woman, Myrna Hansen, that said she had a weird abduction and she had seen a cattle mutilation and all this during it. Leo Sprinkle was flown to Albuquerque on Benowitz's dime to come and do a regression with her. And he said the first time he came, they regressed her and they got a little bit out of her, but they weren't sure. And so Benowitz said, could you please come back? So he came back a month later and he said at that point Benowitz had a gun and a rifle, and he came to the door and said, they're here, get in here quickly. And it's like, well, who's here? He said that the aliens are around. It's like, this was months before he even contacted the Air Force. So he was already well on the way to ruining his own life. It's just that the Air Force, because they wanted, and the CIA and NSA, whoever else was working at the base there, they didn't want him to spread information about defense projects to foreign nationals and to the Russians and the Chinese. So they said, well, why don't we just, instead of telling him to stop, they said, well, he's already got people listening to him. Let's just take control of his perception so that we can tell him what we want to tell him, and that information can get out, and then we can find out who's repeating that information, so we'll know who's listening to him and what they know, and also tell them the wrong stuff.
Wow.
So that they get disinformed through Paul Benowitz. Anyway, and then anytime Benowitz said something about aliens, so-and-so, this and that, they'd say, yeah, sure, that's very interesting, Paul. Why don't you tell us more? And by the way, this is what we know about that. And they would go back and forth with him, and it just made him more and more and more paranoid, and he ended up in a mental institution. I mean, I think his family put him there for about 3 months.
Wow.
Until he calmed down. And then after that, he dialed way back on the UFO stuff. He was still interested in it, but he wasn't nearly in the shape that he was before that.
And how long was that until he
just
passed?
Sat back, let him do whatever he wanted. Let him go. Let him. As long as nothing was being revealed, they didn't really care how crazy he was getting.
Mm-hmm. How long was it after he kind of slowed down that he passed away? Oh yeah, I mean, I went there in 2003. Mm-hmm.
So this was probably 87, 88. So what?
So that many years.
Probably 15, 16 years. He lived. It wasn't like he went into a mental institution, was crazy, his health was affected, and he died. No, I mean, he lived about 15, 16 years after that.
I see. Okay, because I was
So that's why I
confused
said
about
it's short.
that.
I'm sure it shortened his life because he was chain smoking and he was losing sleep. And strangely and frighteningly enough, he said that somebody was sneaking in at night, injecting him with chemicals, which is kind of scary. I don't know. And the funny thing is that both Moore and Doty told me they saw his arms and something was being injected in his arms, and they swear they don't know what the hell that was.
Wow, that's bizarre. Now, you just said Doty said, so you've actually spoken with Doty? Richard Doty?
Yeah, I interviewed him for the book extensively.
Oh, wow.
He won't talk to me now. He got mad at me a couple of years after the book came out.
And why is that?
Because I said he was involved in the Serpo thing, and he absolutely insisted that he wasn't, and I was pretty sure that he was, and he got mad at me for that and said he never wanted to talk to me again. Which, I'm sorry for that, but it's no big loss to me. I don't mind. He can go ahead with his life. I really needed to talk to him about the book. And people say, why do you listen to anything he says? It's like, because I get clues and hints, and sometimes I get confirmation. I don't believe everything. I didn't believe everything he told me, but I did when it coincided with things that other people told me that, were not in the government. So,
yeah, I think it was Mirage Men. That? So he was actually on that, and I believe he talked a bit about that. Were you contacted when they were putting that together?
I'm in about 30% of the movie.
Sorry.
No, I went to New Mexico twice. I was on camera for quite a bit, and much of the stuff in that movie is based on Project Beta. And much of the stuff in Mirage Men is based on Project Beta. However, Mark Pilkington, who wrote the script for that and was producer of that film, he went further and contacted more people and dug a little bit deeper into it.
Wow. So no one else is really, I haven't seen Richard Doty interviewed really by anyone. He might have been on Coast to Coast, but I
He was
don't
on
know.
twice.
He was. Mm-hmm.
Once when Project Beta came out, when I was on, and once when Serpo was going.
Ah, wow.
Those are the only two times he's ever been on, and then I said he was involved in Serpo, and that was a disinformation operation or something like that, and he got mad at me for that. And I was like, well, you were on Coast to Coast when they were talking about Serpo. I can't believe that you weren't involved in it. Well, what I said, it was something to do with disinfo, not to do with a government operation, nothing to do with people coming from a planet and astronauts from Earth going to their planet and all that. I'm 99.9999 almost certain that there's no truth in that whatsoever. What I think is true is that had something to do with some other kind of military operation, probably passing messages back, coded messages back and forth through these releases. And that's what Doty got mad at me about. He said, one, that's not what it was, and two, I'm not involved in it.
Wow. Well, I know we've talked a bit about this, and we've got about another 15 minutes or so. So I wanted to ask you also what you consider a really good UFO case that's unexplainable. I want to talk a little bit about that, because I know you're very level-headed when it comes to UFOs. And by the way, there's a interview with you and Alejandro Rojas on Open Minds. I think it was back in June, and I suggest to the listener to check it out. It's really good. Really enjoyed that. What are some other cases that you think are really, say, important?
The Pascagoula case, like we said, that's really important. I think, some of the earlier ones when, it's not because I'm old or anything, because I'm not horribly old, but I think some of the earlier ones, before people had any specific idea of how they were supposed to describe something or how they were supposed to react from the culture about what something might be, or from UFO researchers or whatever, I think those are more important when people didn't quite know what was going on and didn't really know, there wasn't a script like there is now. And Pascagoula is one of those. And Eagle River with Joe Simonton with the pancakes is one of those. And the Papua New Guinea Father Gill case, that one always fascinates me. I love that case. No explanation for it that I can think of. No mundane explanation, unless it was some sort of device with military or private company they were testing. But in 1960, whatever it was, 65, 4, whenever that thing happened, it was. I don't know if anybody had those capabilities. That's not to say that I think people are coming from other planets in structured craft. I do not know. I'm entertained more by ideas that don't really have anything to do with aliens coming from other planets and structured craft, but do have to do with people's ideas about what's going on, how they report what they've seen, how they remember things, how the brain forms a strange experience into something that makes sense to you, things like that. Which is why, like I said, I'm more interested in cases when people did not know what they were supposed to report. And I read somebody posted something on my Facebook Radio Misterioso page about it was an article by a psychologist, I believe, and it's a woman psychologist. I can't remember her name, but she was saying that most of our memories are probably false anyway because we can't remember exactly what happened. It's all everything we throw in there to try and make it make sense afterwards. Anything from what we did with somebody 10 years ago or 5 years ago or last week when we went out to lunch, all the way up to, UFO abduction and all that. And that's interesting to me because I don't look at it as it explains everything. It's like, no, it really points up the problem of human perception and what's involved in human perception, memory, traumatic, when a trauma is going on, because seeing a UFO or having a close encounter especially is kind of a traumatic thing. It's jarring, traumatic, unexpected, and, so I think it's really important to look at the instrument that is recording all this, which is us, and see how it records input, how it remembers input, how it recalls it, tells the story to ourselves and other people. That's really interesting to me. It's what I'm going to be talking about at the UFO Congress. Alejandro, I sent him a proposal for a paper, and he said, yeah, that sounds good. So in February, I'll be speaking about that kind of stuff and bringing up some of these weird cases, some of the very anomalous cases. There's a very good one, if I may, from I think it's called M. Chilin from Poland in the 1970s, and it makes no sense whatsoever because the witness had no access to TV, movies, very little access to newspapers, so he had no background. But he met these two guys on the road on his horse-drawn cart.
Right.
Oh, have you heard this case?
Oh, yes. I think your speakers are on. I'm hearing feedback when I speak.
Okay, I'll turn them down. Is that a little better?
No, might be a Skype thing.
Okay, well, they're completely off now.
Yeah.
But anyway, he saw a couple of short guys with greenish skin with big feet that look like, scuba flippers, he said, and or that's what he described them as. And they took him to this thing that was floating in a clearing in a field that looked like a big box with screws on the side like drills. He got taken up to it on a platform with pulleys. So people are saying, "Oh, these are screen memories." I was like, "No, they're not. I think he just didn't exactly know what to make of what was going on, and that's what his brain and his recall and everything told him was going on." And they made him take off his clothes, and they kind of ran instruments over him, but they didn't really do anything to him. He said he looked at the door, and there were a bunch of birds, like 7 or 8 crows that were flopping around like they were almost dead. What the hell were those doing there? The door he came through looked like it rolled up like a rolled-up carpet. I mean, what kind of UFO is this? It's not what everybody thinks of when they think of, alien abduction. And then he bowed to them, they bowed back, and he went and stood on the little platform and went back down, and they left. And other people saw this thing in the village too. One kid said he saw it fly over, independent of this guy, and with somebody's head sticking out, looking down at him. So this is not typical, UFO report. And it fascinates me because it means that it's further evidence that, our perception really determines what goes on. And I don't think it's because the only reason we only see grays or whatever now is I think that's what people expect, maybe even subconsciously. So,
wow. One of the things I think about, that, by the way, that story, I did hear that, and I was at a UFO conference, I can't remember where, but I think he joked with them or something, or they got along. He got along with the so-called aliens or something.
Yeah, it was just some, it's like, I wonder why they want me to take my clothes off. Okay. And then they ran some instrument over him, let him put his clothes back on. Apparently they were fascinated by his belt, which is kind of weird. They were eating something that looked like little sticks with tapered ends, he said, that looked like the consistency of cake. Well, what the hell's going on there? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I think that's a clue as to we have to be more concerned with how we perceive things than what we think it is. Because if we think it is something, that's where all we're going to think it is. I was like, it's aliens coming from other planets and structured craft that looks like this. It's like the disclosure movement to me. I will not accept any disclosure from the government unless it's exactly what I think it should be. Because if it's not what I think it should be, then it's a lie and a cover-up and all that. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. Your answer is encoded in your question. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So wow. These are ideas that are running through my head recently.
So the other one you brought up briefly, you said something about a pancake one?
Oh, yeah, the Joe Simonton one where he was Eagle River, 1960. These are all in the 60s and 70s, some earlier. A guy heard a noise. He was like I forgot what his job was. I don't know if he was a lumberjack or I have no idea. Anyway, but he heard a noise in his driveway. He went out there and he said he saw something like two inverted bowls put together and they were black. Or no, I'm sorry, they were shiny on the outside. And the inside, he went and looked in the door and it was completely black, like flat black, matte black. He said there were a couple guys in there and one was cooking something on a grill. And they asked him to go get some water to fill up like this jug they gave him. So he just went and filled it at his faucet and brought it back. And he said the guy kind of nodded and thanked him and gave him these two little cookie pancake things. And then they got the thing closed up and it sailed off over the, why would the guy make that up? I mean, the guy had never really seen such a thing. He wasn't exposed to such things, which is, it's important to me that he didn't really have any background in it. He didn't know what to expect. And he had the little pancake thingies or cookies, and he gave one to the Air Force. He kept one, and I think he had three. But he kept one. He gave one to the Air Force, and I can't remember where the other one went. But anyway, wow. the Air Force did an analysis of it, and they said these are buckwheat pancakes. They're nothing. There's nothing weird about them whatsoever. So,
did he make this up? I'm pretty certain he didn't make it up. But why buckwheat pancakes? I mean, I love these things that don't make any sense because the whole thing doesn't make any sense. So, I don't know. I was thinking if you meet it halfway with its nonsense, maybe you can figure something out. Yeah. Wow. Now, getting back to the perception theory you were talking about, I believe you said some woman came up with. What about things like mass sightings or when people, as far as memory go, a lot of things are documented, on film, say when President Kennedy was shot or something like that. So are you saying that all the different people remember it differently?
I think they might remember it slightly differently, but then we get into areas, and it sounds like I'm going down this infinite regress where I try to, explain an unknown with an unknown. But I think if something happens in a certain area and there's a certain number of people that see it, I think they probably all have pretty much the same. Since it's apparently, even if they're all from the same culture and their same same kind of background and all that, I think they have an agreement somewhere. In their subconscious, I suppose, of what the thing was. Like you see a film of a UFO. We've never seen a film of something walking out of a UFO. We always just see it from far away. Never really that close. So, the more interesting cases to me are the close encounter ones, so 500 feet or less, because very weird things start to happen to people. Further away, people just see shapes. They see something flying through the air, doing very weird things with lights all over them, giant triangles, all that. But as you get, closer to people, you might have a good answer for this, and it might blow all of my ideas to hell. But have there been a close encounter case, like an occupant case with with 10, 15, 20 people? I haven't heard of one. It's always one person, maybe two. The majority is one person, the close encounter
Well, there
case.
was that case in Australia on the side of the highway where all these people stopped, where the beings got out of the craft. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that? Have you ever heard of that one?
No, I'd like to look it up.
Yeah, I hope I'm not getting it wrong. I'm pretty sure it was Australia.
Well, I'll look it up because as I'm doing this paper, I've basically written it, but I'm just modifying it as I find new things. And I'm not going to. I don't want to say something where I ignore some data or ignore something. If it's one thing, I might say, well, there is this one thing, and that might blow my whole thing out of the water. But I would like to know, as you said, I try to be honest with what I'm talking about. I don't want to talk around things or lie about something or be intellectually dishonest about it. So, it'd be interesting to see if there's one case where there's extremely clear that a bunch of people in one place saw the same thing close up. It still wouldn't prove to me there's aliens coming from other planets. It would just prove to me that, at least in this case, a lot of people saw the same thing at once.
Yeah. I mean, there's just the schoolyard cases, Westall, and also in Africa, you just mentioned earlier.
Zimbabwe.
Oh, yeah, Zimbabwe.
Or no, maybe it was South Africa, because Cynthia Hind, the researcher down there, did all the research on that. Yeah, that's another thing I'm interested in. Does what appears on our local environment conform to what we think it should conform to? And does everybody – do the people looking at it actually affect it physically? I don't know. There's a theory now coming about becoming more prominent about an information-based theory of reality rather than a physics-based, which means that if it's just information, if reality is made of bits of information, we can, in a certain way, we can probably make it into whatever we want it to. It's just that most of the time we agree what it's going to be, and that's why we see reality as it is. The other thing is there's a cognitive psychologist. We're almost out of time, from UC Irvine, who gave a TED talk. And Donald Hoffman is his name. His idea is that our perception is determined by our evolution, meaning there could be 100 different things going on in there, or 1,000 things going on in your local environment, but you're only going to care about the 2 or 3 things that concern you. And use those to your advantage, either to eat or run away from or go towards or reproduce or whatever you're going to do. And that you could be missing like 99% of reality. Wow. That's a fascinating idea to me too, and I think it's very relevant to the UFO thing as well.
Yeah, I've mentioned before that our senses only actually absorb so much around us, and they're just things that we can't detect with our senses.
Yeah, if there's a close encounter going on and 1 or 2 or 10 people are looking at it, what if they all turned around 180 degrees and looked in the other direction? What would they see? I'd be fascinated to know what they'd see if they weren't looking right at what they were supposed to be looking at.
Yeah. Wow. All right. So why don't you tell the audience where they can find your show and all that stuff, your website? I think you have a couple of websites, don't you?
Yeah, I got one for the book, itdefieslanguage.com, which I haven't updated in a while, which I should now. Most of my activity is either on a Facebook group for Radio Mysterioso, RadioMisterioso. It's spelled like in Spanish. And there's a Facebook group for that, and also RadioMysterioso.com that has shows going back, 10 years now.
Wow.
And you can get in touch with me through that or through the itdefieslanguage.com site. And if you put in Greg Bishop on Amazon, then all the books I've written will come up. Project Beta and Weird California and the new one, It Defies Language, Wake Up Down There. I think that's all 4 of them. Anyway, so that's all my info.
Great. Excellent, Greg. Well, thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you again in Phoenix.
Yes, definitely. Get in touch before we go over there, and then we can figure a place to meet.
Oh, excellent. All right. Well, take care, and thanks again. So that's it for the free part of the show. If you'd like to subscribe to hear the entire show, plus archives of all the other shows, full 2 hours, only $2 or more per month. You can find that information on podcastufo.com. And the second hour gets really interesting because we have Chris Lambright, who wrote the book X Descending. He calls in and talks about some things that he disagreed a little bit with Greg Bishop on. And also we have other listeners call in that talk about UFO sightings. It's a real good hour, too. Hope you check it out. And we finish off with Alejandro Rojas and the news. Had to do things backwards, as I mentioned before, because Greg Bishop can only be on for an hour. Anyway, so thanks a lot for listening, and we'll be back next week with Joan Bird from Montana. And this is Martin Willis, and I want to thank you for listening, and keep your eyes to the sky.